I did not post the stream link. Can you put the stream link in Discord?
You don't need it.
This is in Discord. I like to record everything. Okay, we're good.
We're putting up. Yep. We're only 3 minutes late.
Or 3 minutes? Oh my gosh.
Only 3 minutes,
gotta cut
right
that
there?
time.
That's record time right there.
No, we don't.
So we're streaming that?
Yep. You are live on the internet.
Never been live.
Your words, not mine.
Hey guys.
And girls.
And girls. Sorry, hey guys and girls. How are you doing today? Just so you guys know,
And girls.
my name is Louis. I've only met about a third of you in the room. I'm in second year, coming into third year. I'm your new ISSessions president. Thank you. I hope to bring a lot of new things in the next few months or so, and I definitely want to increase participation and engagement at the upcoming meetings. I have just a couple of announcements for you today. So one is that we have a tentative date on our CTF in 2020. I think it's going to be March 14th or March 21st, something like that. So right now in the stage of actually looking for sponsors so that we can fund this TF. The last one went really well. We want to make this one even better. So if you know anyone that is at the organizations or at the, that you work for, whether it's co-op or whether you're an alumni, we would really appreciate if you can reach out to that community outreach person in your organization, and maybe we can get talking, and hopefully we can find a way for them to contribute. So it's all about building community, and that's one way for you guys to help us out. So we would really appreciate that. And I'm gonna put a link on Discord, with my contact information so that you can reach out to me in case you think there's something that we can do. The second thing that I want to talk about is just so today we're going to have a special feature story type of segment. So this is a new story that we're going to go into in a little bit more detail. I encourage you guys to participate. Actually, it's not that I encourage you, that's actually the goal of doing this kind of feature story. You all have something to say, and I would love to see that. Adam and I are actually going to be more facilitating than actually leading the story. We would love to hear your opinions. I think that'll make the meetings better, and we have to do more of that in the future.
And then Nick doesn't have to talk as much, and it's going to be fantastic.
So thank you very much, and on to Nick and Adam for the news roundup.
Adam,
Before that, though, any question? Raise your hand if you're going to talk tonight.
Just 3 or 4.
nice.
We got free drinks.
We just don't have to call them ahead of time to warn them, that's all. We're good?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. Yay, summer. Thanks so many people for showing up during summer. That's fantastic.
Great turnout.
Yeah, definitely. So we have articles. We're going to do these, and then we'll go into the sort of that more long form chat. So first off, in the world of kind of good ideas that Google's had recently, the idea that you can now have it wipe your data on a timed interval, right? So for example, maybe I want Google to wipe everything that they have on me after or every 3 months or something like that, which is a fantastic feature. That long overdue, but super cool idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it, and it's pretty simple to use. Reading this article, I went in and changed it. Really simple. We'll see if it actually happens, because I remember Google ran into some issues with location settings where they didn't honor the setting that Google users set. So we'll see if this works properly in a few months. But yeah, it's good to see. I like the direction that they're going with. It's interesting how in the bottom or so, somewhere in the article, they write that it might affect your searching. So play around with the settings, see how far back you want the history to be deleted, and how well the Google's engines can guess what you're asking it. So that's a pretty neat feature, I guess.
It is really cool. Also works really well with all that European legislation where you have a right to be forgotten, right, after a certain amount of time. And rather than putting in the onus now on the people to regularly go in and request to be forgotten, I kind of highlighted the chunk in the article here. There's settings. You just choose one, right? So every 3 months they'll forget about me, which is nice.
Yep.
I wonder if we can show you the first search item that you ever put into Google with your account.
Pardon me?
I wonder if we can ever show you what
okay, maybe, but I used Google when I was in like that summer between grade 8 and grade 9, and I don't want to know.
It's because it's so scary.
Like chat rooms were a thing still. It was a weird time. Yeah. Let's not.
Enough said.
Let's just move along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a great story with a happy
Awesome.
ending, I guess.
Cool, because I'm going to kick it over to you because I totally didn't read this one.
So basically, what they did was they sent, usually when they send out phishing emails, based on what the article, the author said, it's not very convincing and not very great. But this one is an exception because it looks really professional and great and all that, and it looks actually from Amazon. Thing is, they kind of mess up the URL over there, so it doesn't work properly. So, yep. Whoops. Yeah,
enough.
that's about it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Points for effort.
exactly.
I mean, and I guess more generally, one of the things we can't really rely on anymore when we do like end user training, because a lot of you are going to be doing, end user awareness security training, is we can't just tell them to look for easy typos anymore, because back I spent a lot of time now refining these phishing emails and getting rid of all the obvious stuff to the point where soon they're going to be really good. Like even the low tier ones that are sent out en masse will have perfect grammar, perfect spelling, because they're slowly filtering out all the dead giveaway stuff, right? So over time, we're going to have to get better at teaching people how to spot, obviously incorrect stuff. It's just going to get a little bit harder and harder.
People are incorporating links into their emails and stuff like that.
Which
so
makes it even worse because
like
more
you
people are getting
can't-
tech savvy with their emails too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's kind of like you can't not press on links and emails
Yeah.
that you get from people.
So
yeah,
let's just not security. That's cool. Let's go IoT or something. Yeah. So a couple of I think we talked about the Boeing issue with the Max 737 a while ago, and how there was allegedly some sort of software issue that kept these things from not crashing. And I guess Boeing's kind of tracked it down, and they've determined that it was software from a third party that they received that's allegedly responsible for this stuff. So, super not great. And that's a concerning trend that we saw with the Boeing thing, but also allegedly with the VW car scandal a while ago too, where allegedly, like an engineer decided to kind of hide features in software and not sort of push that up the chain until management and stuff like that. So interesting.
it's interesting that for the sensor that displays that the AOA indicator gauge, as they called it, which was an optional feature, they didn't decide to make it just free for other customers to get some good PR. So we'll see.
ADLC safety.
Yep, exactly.
Do you want a plane or do you want the safe plane? It's more money if you want the safe
Yeah.
plane.
But I'm really surprised that it isn't coming out that plane manufacturer, like the FAA, is saying like safety features have to be standard. Like, I don't know, kind of like something that manufacturers should have, but no one's really calling for that. So,
Interesting
yeah.
point.
A strange journey for an NSA zero
Go for
day. So basically, this covers the SMB version 1 vulnerability. It's a pretty nice write-up about the origins and kind of how it became what it became. And so basically, they said how a lot of zero days are like a secret and hidden from Microsoft, but this one is kind of an exception because like a bunch of people use various groups used it to different varying extents, and Microsoft still didn't find out about it until WannaCry, and then that's when they kind of, a month before WannaCry they patched it, so so they got notified about it then. So yeah, and let me see here, what else is there?
Well, there was a neat piece in this timeline, is that a lot of people thought widespread use of like the Eternal Blue Vuln happened after sort of public knowledge of the NSA's tool set being breached, right? But the authors found that it turns out they saw evidence of China using the vulnerability before the tool set had been breached and accessed publicly. So it just sort of, it adds a little more to the timeline, which is interesting. That it's a piece that wasn't really talked about publicly before. So it's cool to see that it actually sort of maybe made its way between a couple of intelligence agencies before being compromised and released into the wild. Neat.
Yep.
Neat. These things have a long and fascinating lifetime too.
Is it the one that news articles been saying that NSA tried exploiting China, but then China was able to block it, but use the same exploit against the NSA?
Might have been. Well, I mean, once you use an ODE, it's out of your hands, right? Like, it's the idea that once I deploy it, bad guy now has a copy of it if they're capturing traffic, so if they can reverse that fast enough. Yeah, that's the tricky part, right, about 0 days. They only work once, and then after that, the opponent has it.
And actually, they did mention, they didn't mention it specifically China, but they did say that the groups may have gotten a hold of it because they got some crash dumps and then reverse engineered the vulnerability. So that's kind of how it may have spread. So maybe the NSA was actually using it in the wild, and people stumbled upon it. Everyone except Microsoft.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So going back to good advice from the 90s, that's still relevant. You can buy stuff secondhand on the internet. I don't know if you knew that. Like eBay and Kijiji are things.
What? No way.
Yeah, they are. It's cool. I only recently discovered.
And it shows up at your door?
Yeah, it does. Well, at the college. I have nobody to sign for stuff, so I send everything
Whatever
here. It's
happened to
amazing.
Amazon's initiative to have you drop off stuff inside your house?
Yeah, totally.
That never took off.
So this article is just talking about stuff that's been found on secondhand hard drives. Every now and then, somebody will just bulk buy a bunch of this stuff through some reseller and just do some analysis and show you what they got. So stuff like archived internet email, interesting email related to like what do you call it? Supply chain management and stuff like that. Lots of photos.
Emails,
Yep.
personally identifiable information. There was also, actually it's interesting how they mentioned solid state drives as well. Like it's kind of hard to mess up a solid state drive format since it's pretty like permanent.
I mean, I'm just amazed people are throwing them out. That's interesting
Yeah.
because like they're expensive. Yeah.
And they wear out too. That's the thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, finding stuff like, for bad guys, finding stuff like birth certificates, basically collections of PII, right? And if there's enough there that I can start taking out credit products in your name, for a bad guy, that's gold. And the fact that we sort of ship this stuff out.
Yeah.
So the what to do message at the end of this is, a couple things. One, just hard disk encryption will mean that you can throw it out anytime, but also when you are throwing out media, make sure it's scrubbed and wiped appropriately. Either if you don't want to take the time to sit there and like format and DD and overwrite everything, there's the more destructive approach of just taking like a power drill right to the hard drive or shredding them. You can rent metal shredders and they drive up to your office. It's super cool. Like door opens and you just feed the hard drives into this big thing that munches them up, and you get bags of metal filings at the end. And you can use that for Christmas decorations.
They were also mentioned that within your company you should wipe the drives and then have someone else do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, yeah, keep doing that, I guess.
Well, we
People
have the
out there.
example of MCX where they went bankrupt, so
Yeah.
the landlord had to stay.
Okay, so having worked on a bunch of those, when a company goes into receivership, meaning you go bankrupt, you can't pay your bills, and the court appoints some kind of consulting or accounting firm to take over your business and run it with the sole goal of trying to sell off as much as they can to pay any of your outstanding debts. A lot of times they will just sort of round up all the computers and tech in the building and just start putting it on auction, right? Now, some of the larger firms that do receivership cases like that are a little bit more wise to it. They know that they actually take images of all the disks first, and then they wipe them, and then sell all the hardware, because actually it's in their best interest to do this, because now you can actually separate the intellectual property that was on disk versus the hardware. And there might actually be some really valuable intellectual property. So it makes sense to preserve and wipe the hardware and send that, and then actually try to sell the data separately, within the confines of Canadian privacy legislation and all that stuff. But yeah, it's actually a better solution. Also good for like maintaining the data for lawsuit purposes, because stuff like that happens. This is going to be like our backup topic if the first discussion doesn't go so well, so we're just going to skip over this one for now, but that was a news story and a half.
Yep. Basically, this is an interesting one, actually, I stumbled upon. Microsoft is considering dropping its Windows password expiration policy. It's a really interesting change. It kind of makes sense because when you have to keep resetting or changing your password, people just go with the easiest one and, like just make small iterations to it.
Oh, you mean like 2019 May, 2019 June?
Yeah, something like that. Exactly. And also,
I don't do that.
Yeah, and actually some of the other logic as well is nice, where they say that if the reason why you would have a a password reset, a periodic password reset, is in case someone steals your credentials, then you'll lock them out like days after. But they say that if you know that accounts have been compromised, you'll just force them to do a reset instead of wait until the password times out and then they reset. So which kind of makes sense. They also increased it to, I believe, 14 character long password, which is pretty
I think
long.
it was 16, actually.
16? Oh, no. Okay. Numbers are hard.
It's okay.
Yep. And so, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
And I mean,
It's a big change.
The advice to rotate passwords on a regular basis was kind of getting a bit old, right? It was from the days where first off the systems didn't have a ton of storage, so passwords were kept kind of small, and when it was fairly easy to like brute force stuff like 6-character passwords, right? But these days, when we really, a lot of systems don't have much in the way of a maximum size limit on a password, there's no reason to enforce that kind of password rotation anymore if people are keeping up with a good minimum sized password, right? Like if you've got a 14, 15, 16 character password, you don't need to rotate that, at least not with the technology that we have right now, right? Maybe like when we get quantum computers that are consumer grade, then maybe, sure, we might have to look back at password rotation, but if your password's that big, like we're talking eons to brute force that, right?
Yep. And also, you'd have to get sealed hashes in the first place. You'd
Yeah,
still be bottlenecked by the network and
Yeah.
the password policy of 5 characters.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
So it's more of an annoyance now that you're right, it just promotes bad password hygiene.
Exactly. It makes it easier for hackers to a certain degree. So, yeah, this is an interesting one. I'll let you take.
Oh, no.
Do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. I think you sent me this one. But
I did.
Oh, no. All right. Well, let's discover this one together because Nick didn't read this one either. FedSnap top exec on allegations he hacked a competitor, stole info about school lunches. I mean, I could see that because it's a competitive industry, right?
Yeah, it is.
And any kind of intel is...
Like a lot of
is
money,
interesting.
and it's like the contracts are about a year, and they're pretty competitive. There's been a lot of...
Oh, he was actually he was just trying to make them look bad. So he actually stole info on the students and sent it to the government to try to make the, I guess, the competition look bad. Like maybe, hey, look how many misfed children there are. These guys are doing bad. Hire us instead. We won't starve kids. Wow.
There's also the
$125,000 bail.
DMCA takedowns. It's kind of like a tit for tat kind of thing
Yeah.
going
Wow.
on. So yeah, I guess it got heated.
And these are school lunch companies. Like, this is the cyberpunk future I was promised in the 80s with all the novels, right? Like that corporate espionage would be absolutely ruthless and it would be over the most trivial stuff, like lunches. Not that that's trivial, kids are important, kids need to eat, but like the fact that two companies like that are going to battle over it is freaking weird.
Yeah.
But, I mean, yes, awesome.
First it was Minecraft, now it's school lunches.
Next, it will be the air pump at the gas station. I don't know. Like air pump companies going at
I
it.
feel like that would be more legitimate than lunch companies though, because at least then it's like, oh, you're fighting over like gas and electricity,
But-
and that's a huge market.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder if like the company that installs the air pumps at gas stations that were independent.
It could be a contractor.
Could be.
Do you think? Maybe they have an AWS bucket that.
Maybe. Okay.
That's handy.
So IoT devices suck right now. But the article's asking, will they continue to be bad? No, they won't. It's just that they're in an earlier stage of development than the rest of tech is at, right? Like it used to be that the endpoints were the most vulnerable thing. And before that, it was the servers were the most vulnerable thing. And before that, it was your network was the most vulnerable thing. But all those things over time, they mature, they get better. But whenever new tech comes along, people forget and they repeat the same set of vulnerabilities that existed 10, 20, 30 years ago. It happened not all that long ago, maybe now, but with, I think it was one of the Linux distros. It was like Ubuntu or something like that. And they had re-implemented a SSH vulnerability that had been patched in like Sun Solaris 10 years before. But the fact that the people that worked on the new edition of the software weren't those people from 10 years ago. So they forgot about that as a concept and as a vulnerability. So we see this kind of recycled now. The big problem with IoT devices is that, oh look, they run like unauthenticated telnet, something that the rest of tech solved 20 years ago. But it's just that it's a different platform, it's different sets of developers who've never had to be conscious of these issues before. So the more they see them, the more they deal with them, the more they start to build procedures, and then their maturity with their software security model evolves along with the rest of the market. They're just kind of playing catch up right now.
Yeah. The mature, like you said, the software is mature, and also they might be writing it from scratch. Like they won't be. It's not like a Windows system or like a Linux system that people know. They grab Linux and then they customize it to their heart's content to run like this website or something like that. With IoT devices, it's like, okay, we have this processor, we need an OS for it. It's like, let's write an OS for it, and then the whole stack.
And it needs to run off of a battery for 5 years.
Yeah.
That's the other. Some of the security challenges around these things are unique as well, right? Like with a regular computer, we can just go and download a new crypto library, and we don't really worry about the fact that it's going to work. We also take for granted the fact that our modern processors have like hardware level instructions to support cryptographic operations. Whereas stuff like IoT devices, like the little wireless modules and stuff, all the crypto in those is software. So it's been rewritten and reported to these tiny little devices. And the old concerns we had over crypto is that it was time consuming, it was power draining. We got all that back now in the world of IoT because we're resource constrained again. Mm-hmm. So again, it's just going to take a while for this stuff to catch up. I'm sure we'll get little itty bitty chips that can support AES and all the rest of it eventually. This is not there yet.
We'll see how it goes. If the legislation does come out, I'd be curious to see how vendors react to it. Whether they'll actually take the challenge, or whether more established companies will stay in the market. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. This is a great graph.
Isn't it? They did a good job. And it's just another interesting article how they mentioned about how bug bounties, they may not always be the best solution. They're not. There's no perfect solution out there. Mm-hmm. Who knew?
Katie knew. She's been screaming this for years, but nobody will listen.
Okay. So I guess Katie knew that. And so, they're just saying that if you do have a bug bounty program, make sure that you have your base is covered, you have the developers that can actually handle the extra load, you are able to invest in the back end first before you have other people contribute to it. Anything else said, Nick?
Yeah, sure. The idea is the problem with it was that people would assume I don't need stuff like secure software programs. I don't need to teach my developers secure software practices. We don't even need to get pen tests because we're just going to do everything with bug bounties now. And Katie's been saying for a while that that's the wrong approach. It's there to supplement your existing operations. It's there to help catch some of the stuff that your developers might miss, but it is not meant to be a substitute for other secure software development life cycles. When the bug bounty programs were first released, it was interesting because graph shows a lot of the action happened inside the US, and companies paid out to American hackers who were finding all these bugs. And then sort of a second wave came along as other countries in the world sort of hopped on board with this, and now there's a ton of other countries competing for bug bounty stuff, to the point where unless you're really, really good, it's not really feasible anymore for one person to make a living or a meaningful living hunting for bug bounties and submitting them for money. You're sort of one blip in all this noise and all this volume over here that it's hard to keep up. Whereas before it was actually possible because there were still a lot of bugs to be found. They were paying out a lot. So the market's shifted a little bit. Not to say that the programs aren't valuable anymore, that they don't have a place. It's just that they can't be the only thing.
You also don't want to send out, even if someone catches it early on, you don't want to ship out a vulnerable product to begin with. So minimizing it, making sure that you have the basic sanity checks in there. They also mentioned that it'd be good to you should use bug bounty programs to hire people that know what they're talking about. Like use them to filter out people. So that's actually an interesting approach I haven't thought of. So yeah, moving on. Application shielding. So basically, they're saying that. Let me see here. This is a while ago. I read.
Oh, just
like-
reverse engineering protection.
Yeah, basically reverse engineering protection. They're talking about binaries and how separating it. You don't want to. No, I just don't remember what.
That's fine.
Sorry.
No, this is another one of those ones you kicked over to me. So okay.
Yeah,
fine.
I did.
No, so from the looks of it, yeah, it's just application hardening and obfuscation and other encryption mechanisms just to make it more difficult to reverse stuff because the apps are the hotness. That's all.
Yep.
Or like reverse an app, because it's Java, you can just reverse the app and then
Yeah.
inject
Although-
your own malicious app.
Yeah. Although you can write C for Android, you just have to write at a much lower level.
C#.
No, you can write C for Android. It's just really low.
Can you?
Yeah, you can. You just don't want to. This one was my call. Always interesting when there's new vulns, and we didn't really have any other vulns to talk about in news this week, so I dropped this one in. Whenever there's anything with SQLite, it's kind of important because all of the databases that are used by all of the applications on your smartphone are all SQLite databases, because your phone doesn't run giant database management servers like Postgre or Microsoft SQL, right? They all just use little flat file databases, so whenever there is an issue with it, it's a great big concern. So Talus Group found one. Talus is that sort of security wing of Cisco. It's just a thing to be worried about. So do patches if that's the thing that you have issues with.
Google Chrome also uses SQLite, so I mean.
Yep,
Okay.
all the browsers do. Yeah, so Firefox, Chrome, whatever the Mac one is.
Safari.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The only one that doesn't is Edge, because Edge just uses SQLite, but under a different name, because that's how Microsoft rolls. But yeah, they use SQLite databases for holding all your cookies, your browsing history, all that kind of stuff. They're useful, single file databases. To be able to discuss and access a single file as though it were a database is really helpful.
The Android phone has like at least 29
Yeah.
SQLite.
Yeah, so if you ever get into like mobile device forensics, it's basically about pulling all the SQLite databases off the phone, along with all the selfies.
Yeah, sometimes you need a more powerful tool. Sometimes you just need something simple.
Yeah, and it works.
And that's what it is.
And it was a use after free, so people still don't know how to write C code. This is basically when you try to access or dereference a pointer or to allocated memory after you've freed it. And in doing that, if bad guys have been able to put other stuff in RAM, they can potentially dump some code into an area that used to be occupied by an object. And then when you go to dereference it, you fire off their code, and that's bad. If that didn't make any sense, that's fine. It will in a year or two. Oh yeah, random GitHub repo. Yeah, I want to start doing a repo of the week anyways, because I have like a metric swear ton of just things starred in my GitHub account that I don't have time, and I will never go through them if I leave it up to myself. So if I start bringing in one to talk about at every meeting, maybe we'll eventually get through them, because I tag stuff that looks cool from a security perspective. So has anybody ever watched the YouTube channel Computer File? Yeah, awesome series. They interview lots of really cool computer scientists at universities in England on whatever topics. And whenever they talk, my favorite episodes are with this guy, Mike Pound, because he usually talks about whatever the cool security vulnerability from the previous week was. And he has really good explanations, really good descriptions, and I found his GitHub. And it's because I was obviously internet stalking him. Because apparently he's my guy. I want to know if he's better than me. He probably is. Anyways, he has this repo on his GitHub page all about a lot of cool programming exercises and examples for doing like secure socket and TLS programming in Java and Python, which is something that is probably of interest to many of the students in this program. So I thought that I would highlight this, and if there's something you want to try, go through it, because he basically just walks you through building a few TLS encrypted services with Python and Java. So that's pretty cool. So that's the thing.
And the next
GitHub
one,
repos.
I'm pretty sure that this has been going on for a while with the key fobs key fob collisions? Is that what it is?
This one was way better though. So okay, so there was this town in Ohio, and they noticed for a few weeks that like just for no reason at times like people's key fobs would just stop working. Garages wouldn't open, cars wouldn't open, and they had to get the American version of the is it CRTC? That's the Canadian one.
NSA
Pardon me?
Research Center.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's from
the radio people who are in charge of all the radios in the U.S. They had to basically go and start doing the thing where they drive the truck around town looking for different signals and beacons, trying to narrow down what it was. And it turned out it was this guy who just knows a bunch of programming and a bit of hardware stuff, and he'd rigged up this machine in his basement to tell him if somebody was walking around upstairs. Just because he wanted to know when other people in his house were doing stuff. So he just had like this little Wi-Fi sensor, but apparently he just gave it too much juice, and it started colliding with all of the stuff in the neighborhood. This is what happens when you screw with radio. Yeah, because it happened to be. It was broadcast. Don't think they have the frequency in here, but it was like 533 megahertz, which is a frequency that conflicts with basically consumer grade key fobs and stuff like that. So if his antenna was getting too much juice and broadcasting the signal too far, it would basically start to jam out other devices. And he had zero idea that was happening because he was just like, "No, man, I made a sensor that just told me if folks were walking around." Amazing.
Lives in the basement for too long.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So awesome, good story. Oh yeah, so smart cities are a thing. Lots of surveillance in China is also a thing. Also, people leaving unsecured Elasticsearch databases on the internet is a thing. So you put those things together, and you basically get a whole bunch of surveillance data about a people living in a city in China in an exposed database on the internet. Holy crap, that's bad. That's pretty much like the synthesis of all the stuff we've been saying, no, we don't want this to happen for this exact reason. So awesome. That's all. Just holy crap. And there was a lot of information. Like it was like facial recognition data, the URLs to captured pictures of their faces, gender,
location, probably.
glass. I assume if they're wearing glasses. Good to know they didn't have age range turned on. Either that or there's like a lot of young people in China. Yeah. Yeah. There's the better data. Like.
Well, it's cool that they were using Elasticsearch.
I see from police. Yeah, that's intense, eh? So now imagine all that just sitting there, unprotected on the internet.
Yeah, that's never gonna end well.
Yeah. Everybody knows Google built a smart city along Queen's Quay, right? Yeah, maybe time to go and have a walk.
And then.
Oh, Microsoft is considering dropping its password policy. So that's the end of our like rapid fire news. So we're gonna kick it off, or over. I guess over is the appropriate term. I'm gonna go over here while you guys do whatever it is you have planned. Thanks.
All right. So basically, the Japanese government is trying to create some as they call defensive but offensive malware at the same time. So. Yeah, what do you think?
Sure, yeah, I mean, this is kind of an interesting story. It's been very, very vague. So, you've got the Japanese government coming out and saying that they're going to release, for the first time ever, this virus that's going to go and somehow be used for retaliatory purposes whenever somebody actually attacks Japan. There's a number of ways we can go through this story, just to kind of give us like a kind of framework to go through. I'm going to go through like the goal, then the adversaries that we're kind of dealing with, just to kind of put this story in context. So from why do nations, just an open-ended question to you guys, why do nations develop cyber weapons? Anyone?
Yep, in the back.
For defense, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point. So we have, for defense and then as a deterrent. Now, does anyone know? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think like just open warfare is just like kind of out of the question. So this isn't more kind of like self-related.
I mean, it
Yeah.
kind of beats mad by a fair bit. I don't think anyone wants like nuclear destruction, but it's like, hey, if we can play on a new field, why not?
Okay, so I'm hearing a few things. So one, it can just be a defensive measure, right? Two, it can be defensive / retaliatory, and three is just full on offensive, right? So I do like the comment about the retaliatory measure. So do we actually know, just in your experience or based on what you've read, okay, if I'm a country and I'm going to develop this virus as a retaliatory measure, has that often worked? So do other countries stop attacking me because they know I have a cyber weapon? Do you think that is an effective way to do that? I see some people shaking their heads, but why wouldn't it work? Yeah.
It can be an effective way. Well, it's the reasoning why of this nuclear issue with these countries who have power. It's almost a deterrent. So if you do have the capability, someone is likely to mess with you. So it's like a psychological. I don't necessarily agree with all this. I'm a peaceful person. But is it sort of the mentality? Is that if I have that power, then someone's less likely to come up against me.
Okay.
But I think that the U.S. is a stockpile of cyber weapons,
Okay.
but they probably the most attacked nation on the planet. So I don't see how it's going to be a deterrent for you to be attacked just because you have a weapon.
I see. So yeah, I mean, is Japan going to be the first country to ever develop a cyber
No.
weapon? No, absolutely not. So you had something to say? Yeah.
Yes, I believe that while cyber technology as to use as a weapon is a possible avenue that it can go down, it wouldn't be the end all and in terms of just warfare itself, because it wouldn't act as a deterrent due to the nature of its property, so to speak. So, for example, today most of our information has been slowly transitioned to digital, just for the sake of both convenience as well as easier management and storage. As a result of these three properties, it gives the attacker every incentive to try to attack it, regardless of whether it fails or succeeds.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it provides a deterrent to develop a cyber weapon, I would say that's the wrong way to go about it, because it's more of a defensive mechanism in order to see.
It's like scaring people.
Yeah.
So it's not going to stop them from developing a cyber weapon, but they're
But it
going
will
to
prevent people who are aware of it from being reckless with it.
Okay, I see. Saw somebody. Yeah.
One of our viewers on the stream said cheap, easy, effective, and sneaky.
Okay.
Yeah,
Love that.
it's
Yeah.
true. It doesn't harm, like, mostly cyber weapons, like, they don't have, a lot of them don't have a human cost, like they don't
There's
kill
no
people.
storage, you
Yeah,
know.
it's more in the digital space, right?
It's very cheap to develop. You can create one in like 5 seconds if you know a good programmer, or you can keep evolving it and working on it and add multiple components to it.
Yeah.
Maybe taking this in a different direction, I'm just curious about why the Japanese are actually talking about this.
I see what you're saying. So why would they actually announce it to the public? You know what? I'm actually not sure. So there's there are some nations out there. So like China, North Korea, Iran. They've never actually admitted to the fact that they developed cyber weapons. And then you've got people like the U.S., the UK, Germany, who are just like, yes, we do this actively. It's only for retaliatory purposes, and sometimes we use it for offensive purposes under special circumstances. But it seems to be just like a policy decision of whether you want to make it public or not.
It kind of leans into the whole hey, I mean, they're kind of it's a show of strength, right? Like a peacock waving its feathers. It's like, hey, I'm here, I'm big, I have this, I can do this if I so choose. It's just another way to try to deter people by letting them know that I'm the big bad in the situation if I want to be. And admittedly, the idea of attacking technology specifically is an amazingly good idea, because a lot of the times society becomes so reliant on the technology they have themselves. Crumble that, you crumble the society, and you're going to have way more casualties than you will ever do just by bombing the place out, potentially, if you hit the right system.
Yeah.
From our viewer as well, avoid international law because it doesn't count as use of force or active war.
Interesting. Okay.
There's a bit of policy void when
Yeah.
it comes to that stuff. But what do you guys think about like the think of it as a weapon that you can just kind of develop and then just kind of hold like a missile on it? Like you build like an atomic missile. Yeah, that's the term for it. Yeah, atomic missile. Yeah, and then you put it in cold storage until you need it. Do you guys think that cyber weapons can be used in the same manner? We develop it and then we're gonna keep it hidden for until we need it. Yeah.
So I just kind of want to like touch base on, the need for a cyber weapon first. Typically you see this because a nation state is lacking from the physicality of defensive or offensive weapons. So they're like Japan isn't like a major player in nuclear arms, right? We've seen it. It's really Russia, United States, China, right? So for a country to defend itself, I think they're pushing more towards cyber now because that's the digital trend, right? Everyone is in the digital space. Infrastructure, financial, healthcare, everything is going online, so it's the natural offensive strategy moving forward. And then kind of like touching on the cold storage thing, it's kind of hit or miss, right? Because with technology constantly evolving so rapidly, like these tools aren't going to be like, there isn't going to be like a cold, so it could be in like your back pocket waiting, but I just think that's kind of just a waste of time, right? If you really want to create cyber weapons, typically they're being used for intel gathering, right?
It's kind of a use them or
it's kind of like the Cold War scenario, right? Where everyone's like, oh hey, I got these weapons here, and oh I got these weapons here. Don't make a move, right? Because no one has the balls to really make a big, substantial move to go and crush infrastructure or take off an entire, power grid offline of like an entire east coast of the United States or something, right? That's like a declaration of war. So I think these are more like kind of like scare tactics to say, hey, like we have a presence in cyber security, we have defensive strategy, we have offensive strategy. Leave it alone.
I do love that comment. So let's build on that. Let's actually put Japan in context. Does anyone know how many attacks are there against Japan? Like every time a machine is attacked, how many attacks are there against Japan every year? I guess I'm asking, is Japan a top target? What do you think? Yeah. So Japan receives roughly about 130 billion attacks per year. That's in the top 5 in the world. And can you guys guess who these attacks are coming from? China's one, just for regional conflict. The U.S. not as much. There's another big player right now in the news a lot. Yeah, North Korea, exactly. So why does North Korea go out and just try and hack people? What is their primary motivation, given that they have a lot of sanctions? Yeah, money. So funding, right? So we've got this nation who basically has little cybersecurity expertise. Their capabilities are not very robust. They're a top target, and at the same time, they have these very big, strong adversaries that have been in this space for a very long time. They're attacking it. So, just to kind of give you some trivia, China has about 130,000 people in their cybersecurity industry. I think Japan is somewhere around 220. So you see there's a huge mismatch in the terms of capabilities there as well. So, and I want to go back to, again, another comment that you mentioned, which is, you can make it a virus, you can make it kind of like an intelligence gathering tool. So here they're marketing it as a virus. So what's the problem with that? I mean, what's the problem with me? Okay, I just got attacked, and I'm going to go out and release this virus on my attacker. What's the problem with that logic?
Virus is usually built towards pre-understood infrastructure or an asset that you're trying to infiltrate. Right?
Exactly.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all package. So usually something that's more tailored to what you're targeting.
That's one. Yeah.
Well, you got the prompt replication. What if it goes beyond the scope of what it's supposed to do?
Exactly. So what you're saying is, if I go and release this virus out into the world, can this virus come back to me? Yeah,
could go
probably,
into those numbers.
right? And do you know, if I want to go and hack Ina's computer, right? Am I gonna be myself using this computer and going out to hack her? No. What do these black hats use? Right? Are they themselves? Right? Can I trace them? Right? They're hiding behind a botnet. Yeah, exactly. They're some compromised machine on some innocent company. So is it going to be good if I go and attack that company back? Right?
Probably not.
Exactly.
But it's another approach. It's another approach to Japan's problems, as you mentioned, of being attacked by these large players. Like they've been. I think we covered in the news a few weeks ago, where Japan's been scanning their network to find vulnerable IoT devices. So yeah, so I guess it's a different approach to the problem. How do you guys see that? Do you guys see that maybe ensuring your defense is a little bit more secure? Trying to cut down on the amount of botnets or the size of these botnets? No?
Can you repeat that?
About how Japan's trying to develop this cyber weapon, but at the same time they're trying to harden their own defenses, I guess. So they're more gearing towards having a more secure cyberspace, or really taking this space more seriously. What do you guys think?
He's saying, is Japan right now, taking cyber defense more seriously going forward, given the situation that they're in? Yeah, I mean, you probably, yeah.
Especially since that one announcement, maybe a couple months back, about how their own, what was it, the information minister?
Yes, okay, yeah, so I was going to get to that actually. So, okay, you want to tell us about that?
I don't remember the exact date for that, but.
No, it's okay, not the exact date, but, okay,
The
so.
context
There's
behind it.
So Japan's cybersecurity minister, I'll just tell you, he apparently does not use computers. So
He's never used a computer.
He's never used a computer before.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't give you much confidence, right? But let's take this from a perspective of an organization. Let's say or a country. Sorry, you're a country and you have this goal. You want to develop cyber weapons, and you're outmatched by these really strong adversaries, right? And your capabilities, you have 220 people. That's it, kind of thing. And then you have this leadership that is not very good. Apparently there was USBs. Apparently, they were asking about USBs that had Stuxnet and Mirai on them, and he had no idea what a USB was. That's, come on, that's ridiculous, right? So, do you guys think that, given the fact that their capabilities are bad, given the fact that the policy, and even the amateurish way in which they've announced this, do you think that it will work? Do you think that this is something that is going to take off and Japan's going to become a major cyber power, given what you've just heard?
Usually when you tell bullies that you're scared, they bully you more.
That's fair. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because then they know they're bothering you.
Yeah.
So it might not be a good strategy to sort of show you're anxious.
Okay.
So their contract is out. What's to prevent, someone else from paying those contractors for code?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point.
I do know that Japan does have a problem importing talent to security as well,
Mhm.
because the person needs to speak Japan, and coming from a world that Japanese. So with the world that mostly anywhere, if you speak English, you can pretty much work anywhere. For a person who learns cybersecurity but does not speak Japanese, they can't import that talent, because if you go there,
Mhm.
companies there are strictly Japanese spoken. If you wanted to move to KPMG there,
Right.
you have to speak Japanese to even work there. Even
Right.
though if you worked at KPMG here,
Mhm.
your skills don't transfer over without Japanese.
Right. So you're saying there is a talent gap that we actually have to address in order to solve this problem,
Yeah.
aside from the leadership gap that we also have right now, given the cybersecurity minister.
I also feel that because of that gap, it's the reason why they're trying to leverage this as a means of, so I guess like, the analogy would be like a firewall, in a sense.
Okay.
Because that way, it's a means of response in order to any attack that will be against, I guess in this case, the government or any citizen within the state. So using that justification, I'd say that this is their means of declaring that this is their defense and this is what you should expect when attacking them, which, although is amateurish, is at least better than what they had before.
Okay. Fair. Yeah. Playing devil's advocate. Yeah. Okay.
Kind of to like the first 2 points made, right? So I think this is like just a bad call to announce something like this. Anytime you experience like a hackback scenario kind of thing, people aren't really open about their intentions or their actual actions. Hackback groups are pretty quiet about what they do. Also, kind of like antagonizing the bully. How often have we seen this? Oh, our stuff is unhackable. It's like an invitation, right? In the InfoSec community, if you say, oh, we're doing this because we're going to use it as a defense strategy, it's almost inviting someone to be like, all right, let's test you out.
Okay.
Right? And then to the second point about contractors and stuff, right? Well, the NSA can't even figure that out. So I don't know what the Japanese are going to do here for, getting contractors to not leak code or be spies essentially.
Yeah.
Right?
And then there's the problem of like, a black hat can go and reverse engineer the code and then use it again.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All great points. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Question.
Oh. I'll come to you, Nick. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Another point is that they released this information, but they're still nowhere near being finished.
Okay.
And it's projected to be finished at the end of the current fiscal year, right? So what's to
Right.
prevent somebody to use this information to preemptively stop or, cause an issue with the development of it already, right?
Yeah, so like even the discourse, like the way they're talking about this is kind of naive in a sense, or maybe they are, it's still in the early stages. They don't really know what's going to happen. Maybe even calling it a virus is the wrong thing to say. Maybe it's more of like just a tool kind of thing. So yeah, we could see more information in the future. And sorry, Nick, you had.
I would argue that it doesn't matter that they have the capability or not.
Okay.
From the perspective of their country, it's a propaganda piece. Who did you say that their adversaries were? You look at countries like North Korea. It's there to basically play North Korea's game, because that's what North Korea does.
Right.
So they're releasing this to say, yeah, we have these powers. And then that filters its way through their citizens, maybe makes its way over the walls, through the borders. Like, whether they have the power or not, it's an effective statement.
Right.
In their situation.
Right. So you're saying it's less a technical statement. It's more of a political statement, and it's a way to induce fear. Almost. Okay.
I mean, look at the winky face on the front. Because that's the kind of thing that do.
That's right. I'm surprised it's not like anime characters or something. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just to tag on to that, I also feel like they did this as a means of like, because they are the government and
Right.
One of the things that recent is that people are sort of like unhappy with is like just transparency in general. So I feel like that also contributes to just having transparency with the government and their citizens in order to at least I think uphold the loyalty that they have that's been a major part of their culture there.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. I don't know anything about Japan, so this is new to me. So yeah, you may be correct. So I guess the last question that I kind of want to ask is, you're right now. You've just the Japan's cyber minister has just been fired, and you are the new Japanese cybersecurity minister. What do you think you would have to do in order to make this an effective strategy, assuming it's not only a political ploy, but it's more of an actual, statement? Hey, we're gonna, actually develop a cyber weapon. How can we do this? Go ahead.
Japanese first.
Speak Japanese first. Okay. Yes, that would help. That would absolutely help.
Yep.
But thinking about like the talent gaps, the policy gaps, what can you address? What can you do? Go ahead.
Wages, so to pay, make it attractive.
Sorry, I can't.
Make it attractive to actually work with them in that industry, so the wages,
Okay. Yeah.
benefits, so actually make it pleasant to actually come to them and work with them.
Right.
So the incentives there.
Yeah. Maybe even like break down barriers, for example. Somehow we can get over this. We need you to speak Japanese to
Oh yeah,
do
of
this.
course, yeah, speak English.
Yeah. I'm sure they speak English in Japan, don't they? I mean, like I feel like that's really
Very
like at all.
Very,
Really?
very.
Wow. Okay.
Have you not seen the Nintendo shows?
Uh,
No, Lip Sync.
No, I have not seen the
Not a
Nintendo.
single direct.
Educate me.
My best friend lived in Japan for 6 years, and it was awful.
Really?
Good,
Okay.
Yeah, nothing's.
I don't know. I would think that. I assumed, I guess, that
Well, if
English
you
was like the
get
second.
English-speaking people, they kind of stick together, but
Right.
for all the local population and businesses and that kind of stuff, it's all that.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Well, what else? I mean, from a policy, do you think that there should be policies about? Okay, we have this virus or tool. When should we use it? Right? Is it gonna be only? Is it gonna go and disable some system, or is it just gonna maybe go so far as to locate where the attacker is? Right? Isn't that stuff that we probably should work out? Right? Yeah.
I think one thing they could do is just go and pee on somebody's leg, like just go and attack someone, like North Korea or whatever, and see what happens.
Right.
You
Okay.
know, because they've been attacked all the time anyway. So
I really hope that
Yeah.
doesn't happen. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
So sorry, I came in a little late, but there was one thing I.
That's okay. Very well dressed, so you're forgiven.
So the thing with like nuclear warhead or with nuclear weapons is that you have this fear. You know it exists. You know it's a real thing, and it's been tested. You know what it can do.
Right.
But when it comes to a cyber weapon, what's the equivalent? Because can you test it? Well, if you test it now, it's maybe not a secret anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you prove that you have one? Right? So I don't know if that part was ever talked about at all.
Yeah. No. That's good. Yeah.
So that's what I thought when I read that brief.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it also contributes to the fact that compared to nuclear warheads, we've actually seen the type of the destruction that it has caused compared to like just the level of damage in terms of just shutting down an organization. In terms of like just the scale, I think that's also one of the huge disparities in our view as to whether it's like something we should be concerned about.
What do you mean?
Because it's more like okay, let me put it this way. So we can only theorize that cyber technology as a weapon can shut down a country, for example.
Okay.
There has been evidence of it shutting down organizations in certain situations.
Mm-hmm.
It's happened. Yeah, there's documented cases of entire countries being shut down.
Really?
In 5 days.
Really? Wow.
I never fully thought about that.
There was one. Nobody ever talks about it. It was in the early 90s. Maybe it was the late 80s. When was the war in Kosovo? Basically, one of the countries was entirely shut down via a cyber attack. It was the first instance of one. So that yes, the country was knocked off the internet and shut down. Yeah, but nobody ever talks
talking
about
about a virus that's being built to attack after it's been attacked, it would be no different than if a country goes in and takes a nuclear warhead from an armory. What are you going to do? You're going to attack to retrieve that item back. So what if the virus is simply designed to go in, attack, retrieve this information, and erase any trail, any data that could have been left behind? Because if you're doing a cyber attack, you're looking for information on something, whether it's on military tactics, finances, personnel information. You just don't want other people to have it.
True. Yeah.
So if a virus is simply designed to go in and scrub all of that intel and retrieve it, it would be no different than a military invading another country to get its property back.
Interesting. Do we have like in cybersecurity like you know how there's like the Geneva Accords for governing how a country or like proportionate retaliation essentially, like if a country attacks you, how far what's the retaliation level, I guess. Do we have something like that in cybersecurity? Does anyone know?
It's country based.
Okay.
Right? There has to be legislation for permitting hackback.
Okay.
Right? Because do that, you could be creating a war, right? Like it could be an act of war. So each country's different, but kind of to that point, right? Like, so this is built really for, you've identified it like a virus, and then you want to go all the way through the chain to the source computer and disable it. That just seems like impossible. Because first off, you have to properly identify the virus as you've been infected.
Right.
Like false positives are a thing, right? So and when you have to bake in automation, like the feasibility of this doesn't seem very realistic, because how do you automate this functionality, right? You can't possibly go through and manually say, okay, yeah, this is a virus, we've identified this is fully a virus now, we're gonna like attack back. Well, like, yeah, right, we have black hats who are really good at their game, right? You can spiral through botnets, right? So even identifying it to like the main source is going to be very, very difficult, if possible at all, right? And then hack them based on some preconceived tool that's already developed, and there's been no recon, no intel. Like, it makes literally no sense in having a cyber weapon to possibly even do this. Like, it doesn't seem feasible, right? Because you'd have to have come up with every different solution and essentially have a backdoor to get into that asset to disable it at that, right? So I don't see how it can identify a virus, because we're already terrible at identifying viruses to begin with. Anyone who's worked in IR knows that, right? The amount of false positives that you encounter is through the roof. And then when you actually do triage a virus, identify what it is, how do you even get back? Right? How do you even know the source half the time? So I don't think this is a very well conceived thought. As Nick mentioned, right, it's definitely propaganda. It plays to that, right? They need to show like a bit of force. They need to show that they have power, because it's kind of like a bunch of people are picking on them right now. You know, they're top 5 in targets. They need to have a vocal presence or something that indicates, yeah, we can do things. But from my understanding, this is like a 3-year strategy, and like to just announce something like that before it's there is just why, right? It's just you're not ready for it. So I think it's very, very amateur, possibly because they have someone who's produced a computer. Yeah, I don't see the feasibility in even this being a thing.
Sure. So I know you want to say something, Adam, but just one thing. Yeah. So just to go back on the first thing that he said, yeah, there's actually no international framework whatsoever for us to figure out. Okay, is there such a thing as proportionate retaliation? That's something that's kind of done on an ad hoc basis between different nations. We don't really have some sort of agreement that's done through the UN or something like that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to get to you all.
those two, and then we'll see if we'll have time.
Okay, sure. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like, I totally agree with what you're saying with the whole hackback just not being a good idea. Totally get that. Totally agree with it. But I think we have to think of it from a different perspective of, cyber attacks is just one avenue of warfare. And if you're talking about setting somebody in the front lines and going on their territory, stuff like that, that's another avenue. So if they know that the Russians are attacking them, they can also use this as a hack back, but it's retaliatory in that sense, right? And that's what I think. Cyber is just one avenue potentially in the whole warfare scheme.
That's fair.
Right.
Yeah.
So if Japan is saying that they have developed a virus, a product, one specific thing, and that this specific thing is going to be a deterrent for other people to attack Japan, then that can only work if they can prove that the deterrent works, right? Like back to the point about they need to test it, prove somewhere in an island or something, right? Like a nuclear orbit. But the moment they do that, they lose that ability to make it a secret, etc. So I think really, if you look at what the purpose of this article, and this whole thing is, it's basically just saying that Japan will hack back. And it's less about the specific product, the specific virus they're making. It's more of I read it as more of a general statement to say, oh, by the way, we're building this virus. It sounds good from a marketing perspective.
I see, okay.
But in reality, it's just, oh, by the way, we will hack back.
I see, interesting.
That's kind of how I would
Right. So it's a show of force, a policy announcement, than a technical
So the
paper.
virus sounds
Yeah.
better to the mass market because they understand that, whereas in reality it's just we're going to attack back.
Interesting.
Like, that's how I would.
Yeah. So I see you guys are on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I see it as like a different approach to the policy, because how are you supposed to respond to a cyber attack? The U.S. has been struggling with it. They've been having a really hard time deterring Russian and Chinese hackers, and they've been trying to. And their approach has been largely to impose sanctions on them, which hasn't been working very well. So I guess with Japan's approach, they're saying that we're going to hack back. And then, or like Israel is sent a nuke to one of the hackers' headquarters. So different approaches. I'm curious to see which one will stick and be effective. So unfortunately, this is all the time we have for this. Next up, we have Peter from Deloitte and Sam from MNP that are going to be talking about threat intelligence. So thank you.
Don't click it.
Okay.
So basically, we just put this one into theirs, right?
Yeah.
But like we leave the stream as is.
Yeah.
I guess you can mute.
Let's mute from OBS. The stream's still showing my laptop. So just reconfigure the display.
It should be
Video capture.
yeah. See what it's set at.
We think it's working. Oh, it's still stuck on my screen? Okay. Well...
Too bad there's no like reset.
Yeah.
Switch it. Maybe switch it to the stream engine. See what happens. Deactivate. Activate. Okay. But that is not. That needs to be corrected.
Yeah.
Resolution. Yeah. Configure video. Again, like we can stretch it, just the image.
In here? Can we do it?
Unless that's the screen. Right click and then lock preview. Yeah, okay, it's just
awesome. Okay. Well, it's a little bit off, but whatever. It's close. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
All right, folks, we're going to start. Thanks everybody for coming in today. I think the previous little discussion we had there about the Japanese and their little media gig that they did, I think that was a very good introduction to what we're doing actually, because we're talking about patterns and behaviors and all things to do with threat intelligence, which I think that was a good discussion for. I'm Sam, this is Peter. We're going to get into introductions in a bit, but we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and threat intelligence. Just before we start begin, we're hoping that this is like an open discussion, so you have any questions or comments, just raise your hand and we'll just carry on, right? So a bit of an anecdote. Back when, it's funny actually, timing is just weird, right? Back like 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was in a boardroom with a bunch of like really high level lawyers and a couple of people on my team, and this thing happened, right? So we had one of our companies, they got breached, and one of the things that they said, they received a notice from the FBI, and this is a Canadian company, stating, your organization will be attacked within the next 20 days. And then, our side put ourselves on mute, and we all just looked at each other, and we're just like, what the hell does that mean? Just like, how do these people know, 20 days from now, you know that you're going to be attacked, right? The organization, and it's funny because our organization did nothing about it. It's bizarre, but that's the state of the world that we live in with our organizations. So this presentation really just discusses that these people are not wizards that determine these whole 20-day cycles and these fun patterns, right? So, good introductions.
Yeah, so as Sam mentioned, I'm Peter. And I know I was introduced working at Deloitte, but you can see there's a cross through there. Actually, yesterday was my official last day at Deloitte. I'm actually going to be moving to ISSSentire, and it's going to be also within threat intelligence. Thank you. Some certifications I have is in reverse engineering malware, so I did that about 2 years ago. Deloitte sponsored that for me, and I did that studying. I also have some AWS background a little bit, so we were trying to build like a forensics lab, so I wanted to get a little bit more knowledge on AWS, so I did a certification on that, so I have some background on that as well. Some fun facts about me: I like to play guitar. Haven't played as much as recently, but I know how to play. I like to play board games, video games, and I like to go camping. It's like a tradition that I do every year. Sam, off to you.
I think the reason why you're not playing guitar is because Deloitte was working you to the bone.
That's probably it.
And there's a reason why we both have the strike through on the Deloitte thing, because I was at Deloitte previously too. Yes, that's true. We didn't think about that beforehand. But, it's a great place to work. So, CSIH, it's a computer security incident handler, recognized by the U.S. government or whatever. GIAC grid in progress, super fanatic around ISSessystems and infrastructure controls and defense. Back about a year and a half ago, so I've been with MNP for 3 years, and about a year and a half to 2 years ago, I started taking on the role of Incident Response National. So I've been building that service, and thanks for Nick and all his help in the previous couple of years, so I appreciate that. I also do a bunch of music as well, and because okay, no, I won't say that. But yeah. Yeah.
So when are you two gonna form a band?
Sorry?
When are you two gonna form a band?
Oh, I mean, I guess now we have time, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good idea. Yeah. So, before we get into that, I think the reason why we made this presentation, or at least why I kind of want to be part of this, and thanks for Peter to step in and help me out, is because I want to be more aware of what threat intelligence had to do with my job and how it can benefit what I do. So we made this presentation just to educate the theory and application of threat intelligence and illustrate where threat intelligence fits within cybersecurity. And I think everybody in the audience, most of us are tech people, but I think, Crystal, you're a lawyer?
I'm still in school, I guess.
Still a lawyer, though. That's good. Then we have political science people as well, and a few web developers and such. So it's a broad variety, and I think we made the different pieces that we put together, I think will benefit everybody. And like going back to the anecdote that I made, we're pulling apart the curtains of threat intelligence so that we're identifying that wizards are not performing these things, right? So, at the end of the day, you're going to be walking away knowing these principles. They are theory as well as applied, and I think Peter and I spoke about this, but you should have the base knowledge after you walk away from today. Just go to a threat intelligence interview, and you should be okay. Obviously, there's a lot more work involved, so you're not experts by the end of this, but it'll help out.
And as Sam mentioned, if you guys have any questions in between when we're talking, let us know.
Yep.
So I guess just starting off, what is threat intelligence? Well, the actual definition, you could say it's raw data, but then you're taking it and interpreting it into something, into a greater context. So an example of this you could say is, let's say you have a domain called example.com. Great, it's an indicator. That's a domain, but what is it? So if you put context on it, let's say for example it might be a domain that's being used by Emotet, and you find out it's a C2. So now you're putting some intelligence on it. Now you have a little bit more context. So now you have a domain and intelligence together. Now it's great, you got now some intel, but you want to actually make sure it's usable. So for your company, you need to know how to learn how to actually use that kind of intelligence. So we're going to go a little bit more into detail after about that.
Right, so this is how Gartner defines it, just a bunch of words. At the end of the day, as Peter said, putting some context information, and you can actually use that at some point, right, in a certain way that you want.
So over here is sort of an overview of how we do the threat intelligence cycle process. So this is sort of how you gather intelligence within a business or your industry. And you'll see this in multiple different threat intel companies. Will do some general cycle that you'll see. It's a feedback loop process. You always want to start with planning and direction. So you sort of want to decide what do you need as intelligence. So for example, that I have here, let's say you're observing some kind of trend in the industry. We're seeing a bigger spike in exposed infrastructure being attacked. So now my business, maybe my managers somewhere up or higher, saying, okay, what are we doing about this? So we go and talk to the threat intel team, and we need to figure out a way how to monitor exposed infrastructure. So that's our requirement that we got. The next step of that would be, how do we collect this information? So tools like, let's say, Shodan, for example, maybe we can use that to monitor exposed infrastructure for our assets, for our clients, or for our own business. So that's the collection phase. The next phase would be the process and exploitation. So how do you use this data? Okay, let's say we see a registration, we see one of the assets pop up on Shodan, for example. great, but what is this? What do you see on there? Is it like a false positive? It might just be like it's like an Apache server, but it's perfectly updated. But you might also see that it's like a outdated Apache server that there's a vulnerability on. So now you want to go and action this, and then you want to go and actually look into this further and create a report on it, which goes into the analysis and production phase. So you go in and you actually create a report. Let's say you write it up so that the executives or your team are aware of what's happening, and then you want to build recommendations on what you would do to remediate the issue. So in this case, like I said, an Apache exposed server that might have a vulnerability, you might say the recommendation is go talk to the vulnerability team, patch that server. So that's putting your report's findings into action. And you can go into step further before for analysis and production. You know, if it was like a pen test team, they might actually go and actually try to see if they can exploit the server or get onto it. And then you have your evaluation and feedback, which is going, and you have your full report. Now you sort of go back to the team and ask, okay, was this useful for you? Did you want more information? Maybe there was more details that were sort of out there, or maybe it wasn't useful information at all. So maybe we don't need to monitor exposed infrastructure. Maybe it didn't really provide value for the company. So this is sort of the cycle that you have, and then you go back to the beginning because you might want to, improve your processes. So talking about threat intelligence in general, there's sort of two buckets that we put in when Sam and I were looking at it. So you have the generation and then the consumption. So for generation, you can generate intelligence both internally and externally. So internal is more what you are within your business. You might have like an IR or forensics investigation, you come up across a certain malware variant or it's like certain indicators, and then you can use that to sort of monitor your infrastructure. So that's sort of internal data that you observed. External is more like working with partners, or you might have like a certain threat intelligence provider, or open source. So you're getting intelligence from there. Now in general, internal is probably more reliable because it's what you're sort of producing, whereas external, unless it's a good source. Open source sometimes it's not the most reliable, and there's sometimes loss in contextualization what these indicators are. And then there's the consumption. So they're both you can consume data both in a proactive or retroactive way. So if you have certain indicators, you can go back and maybe do like a retroactive search. Let's say you have like a certain hash you want to go see, or a certain IP that you're aware of that's being used by a particular malware variant. You might want to go and see if you see that in your like some kind of beacons C2s going through. So that'd be like your hunting team that might go and search that. And proactive as well, like for detection. So you might have like your intelligence platform that's feeding into like a certain SIM platform, so you can detect on that. And then reactive is more like, okay, let's say in Sam's case, he's dealing with an IR incident. Let's say there was some kind of breach, but they're not aware of what this malware was. Maybe they can give us like a hash. We check our intelligence platform, or it turns out we've already tracked this hash, for example. It's let's say it's WannaCry, and then we go and we might have already a lot of intelligence on what this malware variant does, so that they can go back and search for certain things that are happening on the infrastructure versus them sort of just trying to figure out what's going on.
Right, so like I said, passionate about the whole ICS and industrial control systems and those kind of networks. The beauty about these kind of networks is that they're theoretically very simple. In practice, it's a little bit different, but typically what protocols it's using, so you have maybe 5 or 6 protocols that you're using for all your systems. How often the machine speaks or receives communications from where. You should typically know these things because you're not dealing with 500,000 users or around there doing certain things. You're just dealing with specific systems that do very specific things, right? Machine resource consumption at specific times of the day, known versus unknown drivers. An example being, having mrxnet.sys on one of your systems, probably shouldn't be there, or it should be, but that's when you have Stuxnet or not, right? Deviation of this baseline, potentially indicators of compromise, because there's certain things that you will learn about your environment you don't know previously, but it could be an incident that you have to look into, but it might not be too, right? These IOCs can be considered intelligence if formatted according to internal and usable consumption processes. So if you think back to our life cycle, that's when you kind of figure out how do you get to your intelligence from the generation aspect, right?
So there's different ways of sort of how you can use raw data and when it comes to intelligence. So once you sort of gather this information, you sort of want to make sure you get rid of all the false positives, right? So you can have a lot of intelligence, is great, but there's a lot of things that aren't very great. So let's say you have an IP address, for example. A lot of shared infrastructure, right? So like an AWS, GoDaddy, like all those things are very shared. So there might be a lot of domains that are tied to that IP. And a lot of stuff that might be hosted on there are legitimate. And maybe there's a few bad domains that are on there. So if you use an IP and you put it into your SIM to detect on, you're probably going to get a lot of false positives like on legitimate traffic. So that's not very a good indicator. There might be better ones like a hash or a domain or a URL that's a little bit more sure that it's like true positive actually. So you want to sort of weed those out as well, but you also want to weed out like things that might not be relevant to your specific industry. Like let's say you have indicators from ISSes, you wouldn't want like retail indicators that have been observed like attacking different retail clients or customers. And then the other thing I sort of mentioned before, and one of my pet peeves sort of when it comes to intelligence is like you can go on all these open source platforms and a lot of them aren't going to have context. Like you'll get IPs and domains, but I'm like, okay, so what are these? I don't really have the context. So what some of the industry standards out there is there's like JSON, Taxi, and Stix, MISP as well as an open source platform. So these are sort of platforms where you can contextualize these indicators. So you could say like, okay, this pair of IPs are related to C2 communication. These IPs are related to the payload. These are to delivery. So you sort of put more context on these things. And let's say you have a piece of malware. If I was just given a bunch of hashes, I don't really know what these hashes are related to, whereas you can put like, okay, I can give you a hash that has a certain, it says a comment saying what hash this is related to, like malware variant, and maybe like some certain other indicators like the file name, maybe where it writes to directories, and you sort of batch that all together into one versus just a mishmash of like intelligence. So that the human readable format where I have CSV and plain text, those are your less desirable ones because that's usually when you start losing the context on those kind of things. And then yeah, you can have reports as well that describe like have a chart and telling you certain indicators of what these do. So that's another way of sort of presenting that information. So the next slide is more on how the consumption works. So there's different ways of consuming the data. It's not necessarily always just indicators like IPs and domains. It could be certain things that you're observing like trends. So for example, and there's different teams that can consume this data within your business, your security teams. So you can have the more strategic side. So that's more like the trends you observe. So let's say you're seeing an increase of ransomware attacks. Maybe you should go talk to your IT team and say, do we do backups? Do we do redundancy? These are important things to talk about. So you see these trends and then you might do an action based on them. Or you might have like an increase of threat actors in abusing macros, let's say like Excel sheets. Okay, are we blocking macros? Operational is more like the tactics that are being used by actors. So that could be like more like, let's say we're observing like reconnaissance activity on exposed RDP. You'd want like and then you're seeing like brute force spraying attacks or brute force password spraying attacks on certain accounts. We may want to create like rules to detect this. Or you might want to have your hunting team to sort of observe these kind of things. So that's more on the operational side. And then tactical is more specific. Let's say you're seeing a campaign that's targeting certain CVE and that's trying to exploit it, and you're aware of you have this specific CVE within your environment. You want to talk to your vulnerability management team to go and patch that specific system so they're not targeted. And the consumption can work different ways, as I mentioned before. It could be like more intel for your team so they're aware of what's going on, or it could go actually to certain tools. Let's say you had like a bunch of hashes, you might want to push that into your endpoint detection system so that when someone tries to run a piece of malware by accident, it actually prevents it from being executed. And these are sort of more examples of how you can sort of use threat intelligence for consumption. So the first one, this is literally the example I just gave. That you can stop a piece of malware if you have a list of hashes. So there's different software that you can use for that. Or let's say one of your requirements that I had mentioned before, you can have like something that detects like domain squatting. So like the registration of bad domains. Let's say like you had a Walmart, but you had wall and then one marked as the L. So you might want to have something that you're detecting for that. And then if If you see that's being registered, maybe you can go and put a proactive block on your firewall because maybe someone's planning to do a phishing campaign very soon, or maybe you want to warn your customers that there might be a campaign going on, so you sort of do these proactive things before it actually happens. More high-level reports that you can send to your threat hunting team or do defensive actions on. Again, these are for your teams might help to go and look at your environment and see if these things are happening. And then this one's pretty specific, let's say for more retail clients or where you're in a business where there's credit cards involved. You might want to do something like go on the dark web and monitor bins, because if people are talking about these bin numbers, maybe they're selling your credit card data for your specific business, and then you might want to do something automated so that you actually go and tell your fraud team to go and deal with this.
Right, so internal threat intelligence will yield specific output. It's not necessarily better because if you're not doing it properly, then you could lead yourself astray kind of thing. But if you do it properly, and obviously you'd have more experience about what's right and what's wrong, but it'll give you more accurate information that you can use more strategically, right? Versus the external threat intelligence sources where it's general populace, quote unquote, that they're trying to target. So you can use that, but maybe it's not as discreet as you like it to be. A combination of both would be best. So. This one for me?
Yeah.
Right. Ensure the following are present at minimum. So, for an organization that's looking to get into threat intelligence, and it's kind of like a standard practice that you should be doing for cybersecurity. Passive network traffic collection, ingesting and producing IOCs, doing it right in terms of configuring it properly, understanding your environment context of what systems you have and what the potential threat landscape is, but we're not getting there yet. So centralized logging with equivalent requirements of one, and a way to translate sensor source information to something that can be consumed. So, having those base kind of detection / logging principles or approaches, having them there, you can go ahead with that the feedback loop that we've been talking about, right? So. Sure.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, the indicators of compromise here. So you're measuring the baseline of production, and if that deviates, then that's an indicator. But isn't the production kind of always fluctuating? How do you?
Well, you know your environment to a certain degree. So let's say your environment has spikes in CPU utilization at 7 p.m. on Saturday nights. That's probably going to happen at that point. But as CPU utilization spike at Sunday morning at 9 p.m. at 9 a.m., that's kind of a deviation from what you're used to. Obviously, environments are dynamic in nature, but there's general trends, and you can slowly enclose upon that trend space. A lot of organizations aren't really doing this, but there's room for getting better. But does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not perfect. It's more like a guideline.
Yeah, guideline.
For the baselines, what kind of things, like you mentioned CPU utilization, are there other kind of metrics that are useful or maybe more broad?
Well, you take a look at the feedback loop in general, and you kind of plan out, based on your organization, what baselines could be applicable, right? So if you have an organization who has a certain amount of users and they should be working from 9 to 5, and they should have no access or internet activities past 5 p.m. or something like that, maybe that's a place you can look at for doing your indicators, right? On your baselines. There's, think of it as like a spectrum of broad range, such as 9 to 5, outside that deviation, or outside that spectrum as a deviation. That's kind of broad, right? But maybe you want to take a look at your specific servers that do very, very specific things, and you see that you should have X, Y, Z in terms of processes running at this, and this time, or making these communications at this, and this time, right? Any deviation from that should identify something is amiss, right? Does that answer your question?
It's not looking at the whole organization, it's identifying those critical pieces of infrastructure and monitoring those tightly.
It's one way to do it, yeah. I think depending on the size of the organization as well as what you do, It's a little bit harder for some organizations versus others who have more specific needs. You know, like the case in point being ICS environments or OT environments kind of thing, operation technology. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit more defined, but you take a look at the user space of an information technology environment, a lot broader, so you have to have different requirements and different planning that goes into it. Right.
Thank you.
I think that's it, yeah. This one for me, or?
Yeah, so then there's also the external process for an organization. So this one's, like I mentioned before, is more, you have to understand that it has to be niche. Let's say, again, like I said, you can have intelligence, but it's not necessarily useful if it's intelligence for an industry that doesn't apply to your business. So you want to make sure that the intelligence that you're gathering externally is relevant for your environment. And then you want to also automate this process, right? You don't want to manually go and put these indicators into certain platforms or whatever. You want to try to automate it in a sense, like update certain signatures on certain malvariants that you might be getting this data from externally.
All right, so this is a bit of summation of the different areas / buckets, generation, conception. They all fit with under threat intelligence. Essentially, at the end of the day, these kind of 3 bullet points resonate with me. First, understand what you're collecting from the internal and external sources and why, because you're starting to reference your feedback loops, right? Bullet point number 2: deviations from normal operations identifies potential compromise. Okay. Number 3: intelligence can be used in hunting and response activities. So there's multiple ways you can use intelligence, right? Any questions regarding this kind of summation and all the things we just spoke about? Right, a lot of blank faces. Go on.
So once you've identified compromise, where do you go from there? Do you shut things down to safeguard them, or I'm just kind of wondering next.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the question was, what's the next step after you identify these potential compromises or potential indicators? And I mean, it depends on from my perspective, I think it depends on the appetite of the organization. So I mean, if you're a very sophisticated organization, quote unquote sophisticated, you can look into whatever is the indicator. You can, try to put together a profile of what's going on. More of trying to put this in simpler terms, but more like an initial information gathering perspective. For those of us, maybe like a security operations perspective, the first tier, and then you can move on from there. But if you have a small organization with maybe one IT person who doesn't even do security full time, they see one indicator and they just shut down the system. They don't want to shut down the system; they just want to isolate, right? But it's really depends on the situation as well. So, Nick?
I had a question about, so your slide on when an org is mature enough to start,
Sure.
or the things that have to be in place, right? Can you guys comment on that process? Like, have you worked with organizations that were trying to start consuming and using threat intel? Because I always found it daunting. Like, it seems like you have to have a pretty mature practice, but from your slides, you said there's only a couple of things you need in place before you can actually start using it. Can you comment on how hard it is to start using?
Yeah. Well, I think Peter, you can probably speak about the large organizations, but from the small organization perspective, they have one tech person who's maintaining the entire environment, and they're just having very baseline controls, and they don't even have detection or anything of that nature kind of thing, or logging or centralized logging. The intention of this slide was more so, don't attempt threat intelligence, and I think we actually cover this in the next couple slides too. Is don't attempt threat intelligence unless you have these base kind of things, and then you can apply the feedback loop that we're talking about, and say, based off of our planning and expectations and requirements, these extra controls can be put in place, these extra business processes should be put in place, and that way we can theoretically achieve a threat intelligence process. And I mean, I don't think there's one definition of threat intelligence. It's varying on sophistication. So I mean, if you have your base logging systems and your centralized logging and you're passively collecting your network traffic, if you take all that abstract data and apply some sort of logic to it, that's almost threat intelligence as well, in its own mild form, right? So, if you want to talk about the larger organizations, more sophisticated.
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to build upon to the requirements, right? So, you know, there are a lot of, like, we've seen clients and stuff to get the threat intelligence platform. It's there, it sits there, like, hey, we got threat intelligence, but it doesn't really do anything. It just sits there, right? And it comes to the point of meeting requirements. So you gotta know what you need to use this intelligence for. It's great that you have it, but if you're not really understand why you have it or what it's for, it sort of comes back to, okay, let's say you wanted to monitor exposed infrastructure. Okay, well, now how can we do that using the intelligence that we're getting? So you need to have a requirement first before you start just randomly getting data from everywhere. And that sort of helps you as well determine, right? Because it is overwhelming, right? But if you start sort of isolating what you need first, I think that's when it becomes like a little easier to handle. But yeah, as Sam mentioned, you have to sort of be a mature state, right? Threat intelligence is sort of like the new thing right now that's happening, because that's sort of where organizations are heading to. But does that sort of answer your question?
Yep.
Yeah, kind of like in addition of that, so I think like when you think about threat intelligence and maturity of an organization, as a threat intelligence platform for a business, like there's an overarching threat intelligence platform or subscription feeds that you can get, but there's actually individual niche threat intel feeds that you don't really need to be as mature for, right? Like when you look at UEBA, you baseline, okay, now you already have some sort of intelligence baked in, right? That's just one component of threat intel. Or you could have threat intel feed for your network firewall traffic, right, specific to that. So let's say you're using Palo Alto next-gen firewalls. MindMeld is a great open source threat intel that can feed into that. You don't even really need to be a security person. If you have your firewall up and going, you can start seeing threat intel from external threats coming in to identify that. So it's very you can piecemeal a la carte it, but I definitely agree there's a certain level of maturity that needs to be there for things such as threat intel feeds that feed into your SIEM, right? Because there's so many prereqs that you require to have. First, you need that full scale visibility, right? Not just from a centralized logging perspective, but even from an EDR perspective, all the way down to the endpoint, and having that maturity. So I think threat intel programs themselves have a maturity ranking to them as well, right? So kind of more to Nick's point, you don't need to be a totally mature company. There are definitely baby steps and iterations that you can kind of walk into almost to start with threat intel.
Yep, I definitely agree with that. That's for sure. Any other questions regarding the summation? Okay, next one. So this is exactly what we're talking about too. It's long story short, as we were just talking about, attempt to get the basics done first as an organization. And to all of our points here, there are baby steps you can do, but when you take a look at threat intelligence, if you have the base sophistication of architecture, passive defense, and active defense, you're going to return more from your intelligence, right? You can do more things with it if you have the basics done first, right? So, this is exactly it. And offense is another questionable debate that we did have. The whole hack back is from that regard. But I think in terms of this this slide as well as the other one, credits to Rob Lee, obviously, a very smart guy. Offense being, legal retribution and stuff like that, right? So,
can you explain that?
Sure.
Those charts a bit more.
Yeah.
The correlation here.
Right. So, this one, architecture. You're doing some sort of segmentation. In our base security controls like CSE and PCI, you're enforcing or at least recommending segmentation as a very fundamental control, right? If you're not doing that, you can't do active defense correctly, or you're not returning as much on your active defense, right? Think about the other things you can do with architecture, having additional IPSs, or placing your IPSs or IDSs in appropriate places. You're going to have more return from something that you're going to be doing for active defense and intelligence, right? And another very specific point that kind of hits home with me is that I deal with very unsophisticated organizations sometimes, and they don't have detection or logging to any degree, and then they come to us saying, John from accounting did this thing, and we want you to prove it, kind of thing. And then we go in and take a look at their systems, and like we can't prove anything because they're not actually logging anything, right? So they wanted to achieve this offense, but they didn't have the architecture, passive defense, active defense, or intelligence in place to do so, right? So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and just the next.
Right. So in context with this, it just kind of explains that, and it's debatable on, I guess, when I look at it too, it's kind of debatable because many organizations do have issues with base controls, quote unquote, like such as segmentation. They have issues with PCI, even though PCI is very basic. The costs involved, the resources, requires a lot of time and effort for that architecture defenses that they're putting in. So take it as you will for how much you want to invest in architecture from that regard. But offense potentially could be a lot more time consuming and resource intensive once you get to that phase, and you're not actually going to be returning as much to your security. Hopefully that answers your question, or at least the correlation aspect. I'm hazarding a guess that Rob Lee would probably explain this very much better than I do. So, yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with
Yep.
I get what they're going after here, but
Yep.
architecture, the base model of the costs would be much larger than represented.
Yep, and I agree with you too. Yeah.
Right, true cost of ownership is quite extensive. When you do proper passive and active defense, architecture, all of that, there's a large cost to that. So I'm almost kind of saying it should be kind of almost like maybe a straight line, just kind of block.
So if you ever do meet up with Rob Lee, you should date it.
Yeah, I'm probably heading out to a Sam's thing soon, so I might meet him out at one of those.
Cool, right on.
Your offense cost could literally be sending out WannaCry ransomware binaries to other people, and that would only cost you $10.
We get sued from the impact of that.
Yeah. Well, I think the other aspect too, and I think what Rob was trying to get the point across is that offense such as legal and taking somebody to court kind of thing, that's extremely expensive, and you're not necessarily getting really that much out of it when you try to apply that to security, right? So.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So when I look at this and look at architecture being the smallest, my first thought is, okay, that kind of makes sense, because I look at this slide as you're taking an organization and you're like an established organization that has an established architecture where maybe it's not up to the best standard, but it's like maybe good, and so they probably already have some segmentation, et cetera, and then you're adding on security, threat intelligence, all this extra stuff. So architecture is already there, and now you're adding on the extra layers, which are the added costs. Like that's how I imagine Rob is maybe getting at.
Yeah, I see it as the controls down at the architecture level are cheap, right? What's an asset inventory cost you? Versus the next step up is your passive defense, where you start putting in sensors, your active defense, where you've got more IPS solutions, and you're getting less. They're arguing that the best value for your money is at that bottom tier, to have your asset list for software and hardware in place with your free and cheap architectural layout of an organization. That's like your best spend, your best return on investment. And then you get less, like you said, right, as you move up.
Yeah, I think I like your explanation the best. So. Turn to Nick for everything.
That doesn't account for soft cost, right? So those things are maybe not so hard cost burdensome, but when you look at asset management, when you look at things such as properly hardening your infrastructure, your AD environment, those are absolutely very resource intensive processes.
Yep.
That's why you hired a co-op.
Pretty much. Yeah, but I totally agree with you, because I think we take a look at, I've done PCI work before, and I know that the road to PCI is a reason why it's 5 years long. Even though each control is kind of basic when you look at it and you put your resources and time and money into it, it ends up taking you 5 years or longer, and you've never actually done it. So I definitely agree with you from that perspective. Yep.
Do you view this diagram as by levels, or do you view them as like a sum of the parts? Because my understanding here is that you need all of these in order to get like what you want for a security level, rather than having each be its own separate domain as to what you want from each specific level to perform. Is that so? I'm just trying to understand which approach this diagram is really trying to.
Right. So I have to quote Rob on this one. What his kind of approach was is that he built this, offensive intelligence, active defense, passive defense, and architecture based off of walking up to somebody in security and saying, what do you do in security? And then the other person's like, security, that kind of thing, right? So he kind of said, he brought down the layers and said, if you're doing security, you're kind of falling within these buckets. So from that perspective, that's what he was going for. But to kind of answer your question, I'd say, each one is building off each other, but they're both separate.
Okay.
Like they're all separate kind of thing. Because you can have architecture by itself, and then you can add passive defense on top of it, and then add active defense on top of that, but they're not the same, right?
Okay.
So a bit of a confusion. I don't know if anybody wants to answer that question, but
So everyone has an architecture.
yeah.
Like if you have a network, you have a architecture, whether it's good or bad, it's whatever. But you have an architecture. And if you have an architecture, passive defense it's like having a firewall, sort of, right? So you probably already have that. So then it's a question of adding on active defense, which you can't do unless you have an architecture. You have firewalls, which are the lower tiers. You kind of need the lower stuff to get up to the top. Offensive, maybe you don't need. You can do that on its own, but there's minimal value of doing so unless you have a lot of stuff.
So each level sort of lays the foundation for you to build the next layer.
Yeah, I think it's a way to I think there's different ways of looking or thinking about the same thing.
Yeah. I think you had a comment as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I think the way I'm interpreting this is, like a sum of parts. So, you have your architecture, which encompasses probably most of the technology pieces.
Yeah.
And then in the upper layers, it's less about technology, more about like training, processes of people, how do we actually do this? Do we have an incident response plan?
Yep.
Do we have a legal?
Yeah, I think that's another way to look at it too, for sure. Then move on. Here's another way to look at that. If you take a look at architecture, and especially we'll start talking about threat groups specifically in a bit, but you take a look at humans, and we're smart and lazy on purpose kind of thing. We want to perform the least amount of work to get the job done, and we know from APTs and nation states, if there's a gaping hole in the architecture, they're going to use that hole. They don't have to come up with a different hole, right? So simplicity helps in reducing attribution as well. So if you're going to be using Eternal Blue or other very well-known exploits kind of thing, it helps you not be who you're trying to be. I'm trying to word this in a way. So if you're Russia and you have specific tactics and people are studying you, if you use something that's very generic, it helps you not be attributed, right? And then in some summation from the previous slides kind of thing, for organizations looking into threat intelligence, start with the basics first, right?
So this is sort of like an ideal team collaboration for threat intelligence. So if you want like an ideal threat intelligence team, these are some components that maybe would be within the threat intelligence team or teams that you should be working with in your security operations or your whole security department within your business. So collections is sort of the collecting the information I talked about before. So you need to actually gather your intelligence from somewhere. So it might be open source, it might be the dark web, different sources. And then malware and forensics, that might be within your threat intelligence team. It might be a separate team. Really depends how your organization is structured. So they might triage certain items, and they might be looking at a certain malware variant and how they have like certain hashes or the CC2 communication. These are sort of indicators they can extract and bring back to the threat intelligence team. You have more of your internal operations and gathering analysis, so they're the guys who might be actually doing the reports or the capability building, tuning certain things within your organization for specific industry niches. And then your like VM team, it's important that you work with them too. They probably wouldn't be part of your threat intelligence team, but they could. Why it's important, let's say we're seeing a certain campaign again that's targeting a certain CVE, and this is what the threat intelligence team is observing. You want to make sure that you go and talk with your VM team because you want to go and patch those things. Let's say your business is affected by these certain vulnerabilities that are now being exploited. Your threat hunting team, also very important. If you're seeing certain trends, like your threat intel team, you want to go and talk to them about these things so they can go and sort of observe it within the environment to see if this is what's happening. So it's very important that you collaborate with this team. Sometimes threat hunting might be actually within your threat intelligence team as well, and IR as well. So if there's an incident that happened, then you want to go, the threat intelligence team should be talking with the IR team, vice versa. You guys might go and find something that now the threat intel team can keep track of, or you guys need something from us because you've seen an incident, let's say a piece of malware, and we might have certain intel that can help you within your investigation.
Yep.
If you're gathering intel and you find something that would help like another company, do you like get in touch with that company?
Yeah, I totally understand what you mean. I think that's a can of worms as well. I think information sharing isn't to the point where it needs to be in the industry.
And we're going to go and talk about that later on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, there's certain, I think we're definitely going to talk about it, but certain industries and niches, they don't necessarily have competition with each other. If you take a look at the university systems, they're not necessarily competing against each other, like, in a way, but I mean, everybody's on the same side, so they don't have to prevent certain proprietary information from getting out there, and their reputation kind of stays within. So there's one way to look at it, but competition within the private sector is a little bit different, in which case, this is why it's a can of worms, right?
So now we're going to talk more about defining a threat and talk about threat actor groups. So this is called the diamond model. So this is sort of a good sort of way of picturing, like if you're looking at a certain actor or group or certain event that's going on, it sort of gives you an idea of how you can sort of approach a certain situation. So you have your adversary that you might be tracking. Let's say it's a certain APT, Advanced Persistent Threat Actor Group, and then you want to track maybe what their infrastructure is. So maybe they're using certain, like let's say they use always like botnets or something as their infrastructure to attack certain groups or industries. That could be their infrastructure, their capabilities. So what they actually could do, have the ability to steal proprietary information. Like if that's something known that that's what they do, that those are their capabilities, you want to track that as well. And then the victims, so who are they interested in? There might be political interests. There might be for monetization. Usually political interest is more advanced groups, whereas more script kiddies or just actors, like generic more actors that are just going for the money more. So you want to know who the victims are as well. This is sort of the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. So this is sort of one way of approaching it. There's different, you might in your business have certain different kill chains, but this just gives you a certain idea of certain parts. If you're tracking a certain threat actor group, what they sort of do at certain phases within their attack campaigns. So, they might have their reconnaissance phase, and their reconnaissance might be, okay, do like port scanning, or I don't know, just some generic information gathering like off certain websites. Or they might be at another phase, like their delivery. They're known to always deliver macros with Excel sheets. So those are different things I can use to track sort of actor groups. So if you sort of observe these things at different kill chains within your environment, that's sort of how you can map a particular group, for example. Like I said, doesn't necessarily have to look like this, but this is just the sort of industry standard. So another big component when it comes to threat intelligence and tracking actors is TTPs. So the tactic, techniques, and procedures. So the best way of sort of looking at this, or let me read, I guess, the definition. So what it's defined as is this patterns of activities or methods associated with a specific threat actor group or a group of threat actors. So when you're looking at tactics, those are more like high level, sort of the tasks and goals. So sort of what I was talking about with the kill chain before, like, you know, they might want to do some kind of exfiltration on a certain company or some kind of privilege escalation. Then you go and dig down a little more into the certain techniques. So if we're looking at, let's say, the discovery phase, they would want to go and maybe do network sniffing or file and directories traversing. These are things that maybe are observed with a certain actor group. And then going deeper further down is the procedures. So it's a sequence of instructions or tools that they might be using to do, let's say, network sniffing. And this sort of maps this the actually, again, another industry standard, which is the attack MITRE framework. So looking at the framework at the top, that's the tactics. And then you go and dive down and you have, like, let's say for discovery, you have account discovery, and that's your actual techniques. And then going down further, like I mentioned, procedure, that would be how they would execute that certain technique, and then certain tools they might use.
Right, so all the things we just said are fine and dandy. You know, you can use them if you want as an organization or if you're a threat intelligence person kind of thing. Another way to look at it as well is, you know, you're taking a look at the different behaviors, and that's really what we're defining as a behavior. I'm going to throw it as a technique or tactic or procedure kind of thing. All the little behaviors that we see, we can kind of throw it into one bucket. That's like an actor activity. But the thing is, if you see one tactic or procedure by itself, it doesn't gain the necessary context that you need to attribute to somebody or see a higher level kind of thing, right? So you have to put all the little pictures together, and that's how you form form the activity group. Right. Case study. Yep. So Covalite. You know, this is taken from Dragos. It's an incident response firm in the States. I think they have ties with Australia as well. Mainly targeting, or I don't want to say targeting because people take that the wrong way, but they operate within the industrial control space in terms of threats and response. So they've been in this space for quite a few years, and they've been mapping activities and actors kind of thing, Covalite being one of them. So these are all the things that they've been stating in terms of Covalite. I think to a degree, if you're not extremely familiar with threat intelligence processes, it kind of looks like how did they come up with these certain things, right? But you know, as we're just discussing through defining threats and taking a look at tactics and procedures and stuff like that, that's how they do this, right? So go to the next slide. All right, so hypothetically, because I don't work at Dragos, I can just hypothetically assume. You know, Dragos has collection and detection applications in select ICS energy-related organizations worldwide. They're tuned for certain things that they see and have learned, right? This isn't just a one-time deal. You know, they've been in the environment for quite a long time, and that's how they pick up these, and I hate to say this, but big data, right? They analyze the big data. You know, when an action that triggers an alert happens, the action can be fitted within whatever model they're using, whether it's Diamond, MITRE, Lockheed Martin, or all of them together in a certain way. The end result being, you know, you're gaining some sort of context with the situation, right? Picture can be formed. They're not just looking at the individual environments as well, because I mean, they have to think about what's not ICS related. So what's happening in the financial industry, that these are very specific to financial that we're not seeing within ICS environments, right? They can kind of piece together what's very specific in that regard, right? Next one. You know, target industries, financial versus ICS, because there are certain things that happen with the financials versus OT environments. One of the things that they've actually done as well, overhearing one of their webinars or whatever. They knew right away after the specific country was releasing public relations documents that exactly, within a time range, 25 to 35 days later, a targeted spear phishing email is sent to the organization. So it kind of goes back to what our little little story was of your organization will be targeted within 20 days. So they kind of see patterns over time, and this is how they come up with it, right? They piece together the individual movements, nuances of malware, methods of encoding, tendencies of evasion techniques. They kind of piece it together, and the little pictures form the big painting that we're talking about. So.
Yeah, and it becomes sort of like the thumbprint of that actor group, right?
Yeah.
And then if you're, let's say you're IR, let's say you're now investigating something and you start seeing these things and you work with your threat intel team and turns out we're tracking an actor group that has very some similarities, you might realize you're actually being targeted by this specific group.
Yep.
So this is just applying, I guess, to this threat actor group, the diamond model. So for the infrastructure, they're using legitimate infrastructure by their adversaries, and then their IPs are specifically for C2s or university IPs that they're using that I guess they've compromised. And then who are they targeting? Well, they're normally have been seen targeting the electric utility companies in the US, so ICS. And then those are certain different patterns that are observed by the actor group itself.
And the reason why this is kind of faded in or brought in, the second part of it, is because you don't necessarily want to, or it's not the best practice to attribute it to a specific country, because attribution is hard. So saying it's Russia is not the best thing to do. But if you put some sort of name tag to it, such as Covalite, it's kind of abstract in that sense. It's not really saying it's Russia in particular, but at the end of the day, you can kind of line it up with what the intentions are. And I think we sort of spoke about this with the Japanese media thing, is that behaviors of your adversary, such as Covalite, kind of line up with whatever the strategic operations of that nation is doing. So we're only suspecting, or for that regard, that North Korea is behind this, right? So here's another more hands-on. Is this for you?
It's for you, but for these actor groups, why do you think that they have they stick to a specific pattern? Is it because they just invested in that attack path, or what's the reasoning behind it?
Do you want to answer this, or want me to?
Yeah, I think it depends on the group. Sometimes, like you said, they invest a lot of money, and it's easier for them just to reuse the same. Like it's hard sometimes to change your tactics.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's a lot of money they might invest in certain times, and I think the less, maybe more or less advanced ones will reuse certain infrastructure. So it is hard, right? Sometimes some groups will try to change their tactics, but usually there's some leftover ones that maybe they've used before. They might be adding more on, maybe removing some. But yeah, it depends really on the group itself.
So they don't really care if they're identified?
Well, I think we're suspecting certain things at that point. But I mean, if you were part of that nation state and you were higher up on the chain kind of thing, I think you would care about being attributed and wanting to change those patterns. But the reality is like moving as an organization is kind of hard because it's an organization at that point, right? Everybody's working their 9 to 5. They're doing their vacations. They're very good at specific things as the hands-on people kind of thing. You try to change that or operate differently quickly and to not be attributed. Presents very significant challenges, right? There's another question, like going forward, maybe it will become easier to de-identify yourself as an activity group. Which, I mean, if I was in charge, I'd probably want to do that, but it's hard, right? Yeah, so this is kind of the hands-on approach as well. I'm not sure if there's enough pixels there for everybody, but you kind of see it as like there's recon weaponization. So it's basically the Lockheed Martin kill chain. Playbook being Palo Alto's Unit 42, which is their threat intelligence group. I think they do a couple other things as well. Had the opportunity to actually hear one of the guys, like the lead researcher of Unit 42, speak at a manufacturing conference. That Nick was there too. He did make a great cameo. but very smart dude, and he's the one involved with doing this kind of stuff. But here's the other approach would be they map this out and they just give it to everybody, and you can kind of peruse it at your own discretion or use it, right? So. Right, so, long story short, no wizardry here. Just appropriate assumptions based on historical evidence and fundamentals, logic, and processes. Any questions regarding that statement? Okay. We're not done yet. We're not done yet. Hold on.
So
I know you're excited to leave everybody. But
we're sorry.
Right.
There's an epilogue because we had threat intelligence is so big that we just kept adding more and more, and so we didn't know what to even call it anymore. So we're just like, okay, let's call it.
Okay, you get to a round of applause.
So we have a few more slides. Yes, it's a long presentation. So this just goes over sort of like what to look out for when it comes to threat intelligence reports. When you want to go and read them, like how to identify if they're good or bad. You want to make sure, like, sometimes they're not very great, right? So there might not be useful intelligence for your business. So you want to make sure that whoever's report you're reading, that you're reading like industry, like, I don't know if you're reading Trend Micro or if you're reading Palo Alto, like all those different guys who are putting those reports out. You want to make sure they have the facts. So one of the things you want to look at is make sure that when they're sort of saying something, if they're not sure, they actually admit to it and not try to make stuff up in the report that doesn't really have any proof to it. And certain things you want to avoid is using certain words that aren't very certain. So like could, perhaps, possible, maybe. Those are things that can be deceiving when you read these kind of reports. So you want to use more like words of probability, like we think 50% chance that this is something, or it's very probable, or it's very unlikely. Those are better words to use that form less of uncertainty when you read a certain report. There's bias, so you want to look at what sources are they using? Are they just using open source that's very unknown, or are they using like internal data that's more reliable? And then the author as well, right? Sometimes it could be a good like a well-known, like Unit 42, they might be very well-known, but sometimes they might have a new writer that has joined, and they are not as aware of biases, and sometimes when they write, you can see those biases in there. So you want to be very careful about that too, if you're a writer or if you're the one who's reading it. And then some inconsistencies or lack of context when you read it, when you're not sure what's going on when you're reading the report, or it's hard to follow. So I have a report to show an example of. This is one I read last year, and it stuck in my mind, so that's why it's here. So I just remember I was reading into this for my work, and then I was sort of confused because they started talking about, SSH potential scam, and then I go and start reading, and they're talking about RDP ports, but I go back here, and you could see they talk about other ports that they're doing, and I'm like, wait, what? They're targeting SSH ports, but now they're talking about RDP, and then I go and Control F, and they don't mention RDP ever again. What? And then I go and see, where the heck did these things come from? Like, this is their IOCs they have at the bottom, and there are some ports that weren't mentioned at all anywhere in the report. There had some piece of code that had these ports, but again, didn't explain what they were. So I was starting to scratch my head, and I was like, this is very badly formatted. I look at these IOCs, don't really have much context. Yeah, they're IP addresses, but what are they? C2? Are they for delivery? I'm just like, what? This report's just bad. And then I look at the time and I'm like, okay, I'll give them some slack. It was published at 5:01 a.m. They were probably drunk. But let's not excuse them, because as known as a good reporter, they shouldn't be publishing something like this. It should have been QA'd properly. But it happens, and actually surprisingly, they never fixed this. I went to go check because this is current, and this is literally from a year ago. They never changed it, so interesting. So this is just going overview of how things look like from my end as a threat intelligence analyst. So here's an example of sort of what we talked about before. Typo squatting. You might see a domain registration, like I said before, like Walmart.com with a 1, and then you go and what you want to do is look at if people are chatting about this domain. Maybe there's already people who have seen some phishing campaigns going on this domain, or you want to go and look at the infrastructure, what's the infrastructure that's being hosted, you go and look at who has information, maybe you'll find the actor. Usually not, they will hide their who is information, but you want to go and check those things. What infrastructure are they using? Maybe this infrastructure has been used by the specific group anymore, you might have intel on it. So you use various tools, and then you can start, if you think this is actually related to from phishing, sometimes there will be actors or people that are just registering domains for the heck of it because then they want to monetize on it. So you want to sort of figure that out if this is potentially actually going to be a campaign or if it's just for monetization. And then you go and create a report and give certain recommendations. So in this case, you might want to tell your business or your client, take down this domain or block it on the firewall because it might be getting used for a phishing campaign very soon. And then you might want to engage like legal teams as well, because if it's a proprietary name like Walmart, let's say, you don't want anyone else to have that name registered. You want to sort of try to take it down, so you might try to work with lawyers and try to get it down. It's not an easy thing to do, but that's something you could try to action.
Right, so this works for me. Given a response, and because we're in the consulting, I'm in the consulting world, no organization is ever the same for me to a certain degree. So it kind of makes it a little bit more difficult than usual, but I still follow the standard practice of this. Given a response, I kind of create what I call an IOC profile. IP addresses, network traffic nuances, accounts, files, processes, services, registries, gathering up all that related to whatever the identified incident is. Put that all together, try to understand it from context perspective, perform some open source intelligence gathering on it, like a quick Google, that helps a lot. Talking to vendors, partners on the profile and seeing what they have on it. Assuming, and just go back to your point up there about non-disclosure agreements, communicating certain information back and forth, and abstraction of IDs if required. So not giving away information to a degree. It's a bit of a spectrum. That's unique to the organization. Uses profile in threat environment manipulation activities such as modifying firewall rules, IPSs and signatures, etc., isolation purposes. At the end of the day, you can also place this IOC profile and use that within your diamond models, kill chains, miters, to determine the phase the attacker is in. For the most part, benign malware or incidental malware, if you want to call it that, don't necessarily have to be put in this because you kind of figure out it was just a user who clicked a link and it wasn't necessarily targeted in that regard. So different approaches there. Right? It's just speaks benign incidental malware. So okay.
So going to certain the pitfalls of threat intelligence that maybe I've observed over time, I've mentioned before, teams are overwhelmed sometimes. They get an indicator platform and there's so many indicators, they don't know what to do with them, or there's no context again. So you really want to make sure you really understand what these indicators are. Again, that goes back to getting contextualization using platforms like Stix or MISP that, you can track certain indicators and you have context on them. And you also know sort of like what campaigns they're related to or certain industries, so you can ingest for specific things. So it's getting better, but these are things that's something that I've observed. Going back again, what I just said, if you're an ICS company, there's probably APTs that are going to be trying to go after you versus like a retail company. If you're a retail company, most likely APTs won't be targeting you. It might happen, but you don't really have that kind of proprietary information that they'd be interested in. So certain indicators might not be useful for you. Data collection, again, but no threat intel, no actual analysis on them. So again, contextualization, if you don't have any context on them, you don't really know what to do. So going back to that report I showed, you have IPs, but you don't really know what they are. There's no context on them. And then the other one is like legal battles. So this is what sort of we were bringing up before. That's a big challenge as well. Something that I guess leaders sometimes you have to deal with a lot of like legal battles. And I've talked to people in the industry to share indicators because you might observe a malicious IP, but it's not your internal IP. But that's something that sometimes leaders don't understand. They're like, oh no, this is like our information, we can't share it. and then you have to deal with legal battles sometimes. But I think that's comes with education a lot. So you really want to. That's like another big problem that happens. But there are actual platforms. They're called the ISSEcs. So if you're a business, if you might be already working with them in your business, and there's like the retail ISSEC, there's like the banking, financial ISSEcs. These are different like groups where businesses work together to share intelligence with each other. So you could get into those things. So if your business, you might already be doing it, or you can try to actually look into your specific industry in your business and try to work with these different platforms because they might have indicators that would be useful for you or vice versa. So where are things going? Yeah, like I said, sharing is very important. Another big thing, like especially when talking about the dark web, something that's been sort of changing over time is there was a lot of actors talking before on these different forums, but after all the things that have been happening in the last few years of different countries and stuff shutting down these servers and stuff that they're running, they've been using more like private messaging, like Telegram, WhatsApp. So it's very hard to go and look on, like even if you can get on the dark web, you might not find a lot of the chatter that they're having. So that's a big challenge right now. So that's why it's so important to talk with other people in the industry. Because if you're seeing something happening in your specific business, you might be able to share that with someone else. And it's very important that you share this, like any intelligence you have, if you're doing threat intelligence in your business, it's very important you talk with all your other security teams. Threat intelligence is almost like should be in the middle of where all the other teams are, and you get information from them, but you should be sharing everything that you're observing with them. And then the other one is multi-indicator relevancy analysis, so sort of like building on the whole AI stuff that's a big trend right now. So let's say you have a certain IP, that itself might not be a good indicator, but let's say you're seeing an IP and a domain together that becomes maybe a multi-indicator, not like a relevancy thing, so you can sort of trigger on that, versus if you just saw an IP, you would ignore it. So that's sort of another direction that things are going.
All right, so all the CISOs out there, two sales approaches, and especially in the consulting world. Threat intelligence is the product, so it'd be like specific RSS feeds from that regard. Other ways that it is the product, right? The other approach would be bundled within other products. So doing a managed detection and response, you throw threat intelligence within that. You have a security operations center. It has a threat intelligence capability. Everything's together, and it makes it easier in terms of signing contracts, right? U.S. market has an appetite for option 1, and I think Canadian market has an appetite for option 2, and we can infer certain things by this, whether it's due to the U.S. being more sophisticated, or there's just a different target market, a different audience, right? But that's the takeaway there.
I think it's slowly changing over time, but yeah, that's generally what's been seen.
All right,
Okay,
so
now we're done.
Yeah. Second round of applause, please. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Simon and Peter? No?
We got one up there. Yeah, he's gonna be. Okay.
Quick question. I know we're related. Attribution. So when you have an EPT, you try and attribute it. You say, you give it a name, but you really mean like a country. How often, or has there ever been 100% attribution for that type, like an EPT, nation state type of thing? And how easy is that to actually attribute?
Well, okay, so I'll let Peter answer this one after this, just anecdote. 100% attribution. I'll take a look at a very recent thing that happened was NotPetya or some other Russian affiliated state, supposedly Russian. They attacked an organization somewhere in the world. Organization tried to claim the insurance policy, and the insurance policy denied it because they said it was an act of war. So if they're saying it's an act of war, that means it had to come from a specific country. So they're attributing it. So is that 100% attribution? In some people's eyes, yes, right? So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I think it's very hard to do 100% attribution. There's always going to be some maybe anomalies or changes, sort of like we talked, like different tactics might change and stuff. So, and it's also political things. Like it's the bias thing too, right? One person will see it this way and one person will see it the other way. So it's very hard unless you have like hard evidence, like for everything. It's I think very hard to get 100%.
The U.S. never really owned up to Stuxnet, and we've known for certain for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certain if you own up to it, I think that's attribution at that point. Even then, it's kind of debatable as well. But
nobody ever owns up to it.
yeah. Well, I mean, for certain terrorist activities or activism, you can own up to it, and theoretically, it's attributed that way. But all right, thanks everybody for listening. Oh, we got one more question.
Yeah, just curiosity. Have you, when you gather your intelligence, have you contacted the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity? Do you use their tool for sharing information?
Right, so I have contacted the authorities before. Ultimately, it's the discretion of the organization itself on if they want to contact the authorities or that regard. The CCCS, Canadian Cybersecurity Center for Security, whatever you call it, they don't do the authority aspect, but they will help, and it's supposed to be very confidential in what they're doing. I haven't ran into an issue or a situation where the organization that I'm dealing with actually contacts them, but we have our own ties with the RCMP and people within the CCS, and that relationship is really building as well. But that's the intention of the CCS. Do I use the tools like assembly line in those regards? I personally don't have time. I just try to go about it in different ways. But I don't know if you have any contacts with authorities or.
Maybe not authority, but like some of the government partners we've worked with, but more that they give us like their certain indicators they've observed. So we didn't really work hard with them, but I think they're becoming way more open.
Yeah, I agree.
Over time, yeah.
Yep.
Like you said, servers you can get from them that have pre-done tools that you just put in place and
Yeah, well, I think they've made some major advancements in the past couple of years. The U.S. Joint Executive Orders in 2016 and the reestablishment of Canadian security in 2018 pretty important. I think they're doing some really good stuff. So I think the old adage of Canada's security at a federal level is not so great. I think that's slowly turned around, if not turned around already. So, any other questions? All right, so to the pub we go.
Thank you for coming out. Thank you guys for coming.